Hey guys! Tonight we are leaving behind the glow of screens and the hum of modern life to step into the quiet, ink-stained world of a young Abraham Lincoln. You're not in a stuffy lecture hall. You're perched on a rough-hewn stool in a general store, the air thick with the smell of tobacco and sawdust, listening to the scratch of a quill as a man wrestles with his thoughts. And just a quick reality check. If we were actually traveling back to his childhood, your chances of surviving a common winter illness without modern medicine are, frankly, not great. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to hear where in the world you're listening from and what the local time is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are born into a world of silent, immense labor. There is no sound of traffic, only the crack of an axe against hardwood, the sigh of the wind through the Kentucky timber, and the distant, lonely call of a whippoorwill. Your first home is a single-room cabin with a dirt floor, a structure so humble it feels less like a building and more like a temporary agreement with the wilderness. The chill of a winter morning seeps into your bones before you even open your eyes, and the day's first task is simply to survive it. This is the rough draft of a president, written not on paper, but in calloused hands and a spine that learns early how to carry weight. You split rails for fences, your muscles burning with a fatigue that feels eternal, each blow a punctuation mark in a sentence you didn't choose to write. The historical record is stark on one fact. The total sum of your formal schooling in these frontier years amounts to less than 12 months. Everything else, every book, every idea, every Latinate word you will later wield with such precision is stolen. Stolen by firelight, stolen in the moments between backbreaking chores, stolen with a desperate hunger that physical labor cannot satisfy. Your mind becomes a secret library. You devour the Bible, Aesop's fables, Robinson Crusoe, and Parson Weems' wildly imaginative biography of George Washington. The books are few, so you read them until the words wear grooves in your memory. You practice writing by scratching sums on the back of a wooden shovel with a charred stick, the world's most impractical notebook. And you talk. You listen to the rough, uneducated politics of the men gathered at the local store, their arguments about tariffs and internal improvements. You see the logic in their positions, and you also see the gaps, and you begin, quietly, to form your own thoughts. It's here, in this landscape of brute force, that your most famous feat of strength occurs. You are, for a time, the best wrestler in your county. But the quirky, fringe tidbit that history often overlooks is the time you were kicked in the head by a horse and lay unconscious for hours, everyone certain you were dead. You woke up, of course, and started talking, leading the local wags to joke that the horse kick finally knocked some sense into you. It's a bizarre, almost tall tale moment that feels more like folklore than biography. A reminder that the line between a historical figure and a Paul Bunyan-esque legend was very thin on the American frontier.
Your relationship with your father, Thomas Lincoln, is a complex and silent one. He is a man of the land, his world defined by physical need and hard Protestant certainty. You are a man of the mind, stretching toward horizons he cannot see and likely distrusts. He rents you out for labor, and the money you earn goes directly into his hands, a transaction that feels less like fatherly guidance and more like indenture. Historians still argue whether Thomas was a shiftless failure or simply a man of his time, struggling against a frontier that broke many better men. The open scholarly debate often centers on a single, telling fact. When Thomas lay dying, he sent word, asking you to come. You did not. You sent a letter explaining that you feared you would not make it in time. A practical and perhaps politically necessary excuse, but an excuse nonetheless. The silence between a father and a son can be the loudest sound in a person's life, and yours was a silence filled with the echo of falling trees and the unspoken understanding that you had chosen a different path. You leave that cabin, that life, not with a dramatic farewell, but with a slow, steady pulling away, like a river current finally breaking free of a stubborn bank. You are adrift now, a tall, awkward, impossibly strong young man with a few books in a sack and a head full of questions, floating down the Sangamon River on a flatboat toward a place called New Salem, ready to become someone else.
The flatboat journey ends not with a grand arrival, but with a grounding, the rough wood of the vessel settling into the mud of the Sangamon riverbank. You step into New Salem, Illinois, a town so new the sap still seems to be weeping from the pine logs of its buildings. It's a cluster of maybe 24 structures, a comma in the long sentence of the prairie, and it's here you decide to pause. You have no plan, no profession, no prospects beyond the strength in your back and the strange, compelling way you have with words. You find work as a clerk in Denton Offutt's store, and it's here that you become a fixture, a lanky giant leaning against the counter, ready to split a log or split a difference in opinion. The store is the internet of its day, a hub of gossip, news, and commerce, and you are its most attentive server. You hear every local grievance, every political theory, every tall tale. And then, in 1833, you get your first real, semi-official role. You are appointed the postmaster of New Salem. The salary is minimal, but the privilege is immense. For the first time, you have a legitimate reason to handle the written word, to be the conduit through which the outside world whispers to this small community. Your post office is a corner of the store, a small desk littered with envelopes and newspapers. The job is simple. When the mail rider comes through, you sort the letters and hold them for pickup. There's no home delivery. Everyone comes to you. You learn the handwriting of lovers, the formal script of lawyers, the shaky penmanship of the elderly. You become the keeper of secrets, knowing who is receiving letters from where and who never gets any at all. The mainstream historical fact of this period is your sheer, dogged self-education. While managing the mail, you are simultaneously studying law, reading Blackstone's commentaries and other legal texts, parsing dense paragraphs on torts and contracts while waiting for a farmer to come collect his agricultural journal. You are quite literally building your mind, brick by intellectual brick, in the quiet moments between customers. And you develop a habit that would give any modern postal inspector a heart attack. You open the newspapers first. Before anyone else can see them, you tear open the bundles from St. Louis, Chicago, and Washington, D.C., devouring the political news and the congressional debates. It's a minor violation of protocol, but for you, it's a necessary one. Your university tuition paid in the currency of current events. The quirky, fringe tidbit from this era involves your unique filing system. With no pockets large enough in your ill-fitting trousers, you take to storing the incoming mail for the townspeople in the vast, crown-like interior of your signature stovepipe hat. Letters, bills, and newspapers all get crammed in there, a walking, talking post office. A local farmer coming to collect his mail would find you deep in conversation, and you'd simply doff your hat, root around inside, and pull out his correspondence, slightly crumpled, but perfectly delivered. It's an image that borders on the absurd, the future savior of the Union using his head, quite literally, as a filing cabinet. It speaks to a charming, almost childlike practicality,
a refusal to be bound by convention when a perfectly good hat is going to waste. And it's in this store, surrounded by barrels of flour and nails, that you get your first taste of politics, running for the Illinois state legislature. You lose this first race, but you finish respectably in your own community, a sign that people are starting to listen, to see past the gangly frame to the mind at work.
Historians still argue whether your time in New Salem was a calculated launch of a political career or simply a series of lucky breaks and friendships that coalesced into opportunity. Was the postmaster role a strategic step toward building a network, or was it just a job that kept you fed while you figured out what you really wanted to be? The debate hinges on your intentions, a thing no ledger can ever truly record. What is clear is the persona you craft here. Honest Abe. The nickname sticks after you walk 6 miles to return a few cents to a woman you overcharged for dry goods. It's a good story, and it's true. But it's also brilliant, early brand management. In a world of hucksters and sharp dealers, you position yourself as the one man who cannot tell a lie, or at least the one man who will walk a long way to correct a small one. You even serve as a surveyor for a time, laying out the lines for the town of Petersburg, translating the abstract geometry of plots and boundaries into tangible stakes in the ground. Your mind is learning to shape the physical world, just as your words are learning to shape opinion. But New Salem is not a forever place. The town itself is dying, its economic lifeblood slowly draining away as the railroad plans bypass it. You can feel the future shifting, moving away from the river and toward the rails. Your own trajectory is mirroring this. You get your law license, and the world of the county circuit court with its travel and theatrics calls to you more than the quiet of a failing village. The letters in your hat are now your own. Correspondence with other lawyers, with political allies. The young man who arrived on a flatboat is ready to leave on a horse, with a saddlebag full of law books and a head full of ambition. You say quiet goodbyes to the friends you've made, the people who knew you when you were just the postmaster who stored the mail in his hat, and you point yourself toward Springfield, the new state capital, where the stakes are higher and the debates are louder. The whispers of New Salem have prepared you for the speeches to come.
Springfield is a different kind of wilderness. The mud on the streets is just as deep, but the stakes are higher, the suits are finer, and the conversations in the taverns are about legislation and land speculation, not just crop yields. You arrive with all your worldly possessions in a pair of saddlebags, so broke you have to partner with another lawyer just to afford a sign to hang outside your door. You're a man of the law now, but you're also a man alone, a familiar feeling that has followed you from the frontier. And then you meet Mary Todd. She is a whirlwind in a hoop skirt, educated, witty, and politically sharp, moving through the parlors of Springfield's elite with a confidence that both attracts and intimidates you. She speaks French, reads poetry, and understands the machinery of power in a way you're still learning. Courting her is like trying to hold a conversation with a lightning bolt. Your first encounters are in the crowded, gas-lit sitting room of her sister's mansion, a world away from the single-room cabins of your youth. You sit with her on a horsehair sofa, your large, rough hands awkward in your lap, while she talks of Henry Clay and the latest novels from the East. The letters begin as a necessary form of courtship, a way to bridge the gaps between formal visits. But they quickly become something more, a battlefield of anxiety and intention. You write to her with a formality that can't quite conceal a deep-seated turmoil. You call her Molly, and your words are a strange mix of profound affection and palpable dread. In one, you confess, "I want in all cases to do right, and most particularly so in all cases with you." It's a sentence that feels like it's being pulled from you, a confession of a man who fears his own capacity for error, especially in matters of the heart. The mainstream historical fact of your relationship is its tumultuous, on-again, off-again nature. In the winter of 1841, you break off the engagement. It's a crisis that sends you into a profound depression, what your friends at the time called a hypochondriasis, where you take to your bed for days, unable to face the world.
The thought of marriage, of binding this vibrant, ambitious woman to your own uncertain and melancholy self, feels like a kind of trap for both of you. The quirky, fringe tidbit that biographers love to whisper about is the potential for a rival and a duel. The story goes that Mary Todd was also being courted by the fiery Stephen Douglas, your future political nemesis. The short, dapper, little giant with his oratorical flourishes versus the tall, awkward, honest Abe with his slow, deliberate logic. It's a fantastic historical love triangle, but most serious scholars dismiss it as gossip, a later invention to add drama to the prelude of their great debates. The real rivalry was likely less romantic and more political, but the persistence of the tale speaks to the dramatic tension of the time. The real agony is quieter, found in the silence between your letters, in the long walks you take alone through the frost-covered streets of Springfield, wrestling with the decision that feels as monumental as any piece of legislation. You're a man who prizes logic above all else, and the chaotic, unpredictable terrain of love is a country for which you have no reliable map.
Historians still argue whether your marriage to Mary Todd was a love match forged in intellectual companionship or a calculated political union that advanced your standing in the powerful Todd family network. Was it the heart or the head that ultimately prevailed? The debate is fueled by the known volatility of your later domestic life, the storms of temper and grief that would mark your years in the White House. But in this moment, in the fall of 1842, after a clandestine meeting arranged by a mutual friend, the engagement is back on. There is no grand romantic gesture. The reconciliation is practical, almost hurried. The wedding is set for November 4, and when a friend asks you where you are going, you reportedly reply, "To hell, I suppose." It's a joke, the kind of dark, self-deprecating humor you're known for, but it's a joke that carries the weight of your very real fears. The ceremony itself is a small, sudden affair in the parlor, the cake purchased last minute from a local baker. You, the groom, are so lost in thought that when the minister asks for the ring, you fumble and produce one with the engraving, "Love is eternal," a sentiment that feels both hopeful and terribly, terribly binding. You stand there, a 33-year-old man, finally taking a wife. The weight of the gold ring on her finger is nothing compared to the weight of the future you are now accepting. Mary Todd Lincoln is not a simple frontier woman. She is a force and partner who will push you, challenge you, and share your ambition in a way no one else ever has. As you look at her, you know your life is no longer your own. The solitary walks, the long nights of reading by a single candle, the freedom to be consumed by your own thoughts, these are now relics of a past life. You have chosen a companion for the climb, and the path ahead is steeper and more unpredictable than any you have walked before. The quiet agony of the letters has subsided, replaced by the loud reality of shared space, shared debts, and a shared destiny that is only just beginning to unspool.
Washington City, when you finally reach it in 1847, is a place of grand ambitions and swampy miasmas, a capital that seems only half-finished, much like the nation it represents. You arrive as a freshman Whig congressman, your wife Mary, and your two young sons Robert and Eddie in tow, taking up residence in a cramped boarding house that smells of damped wool and cabbage. The grandeur of the Capitol building, with its still under-construction dome, feels a world away from the mud and chatter of the Illinois 8th Judicial Circuit. Here, you are a nobody. The great men of the age, Webster, Calhoun, Clay, stride through the marbled halls, and you are just another tall, awkward face from the western prairies, your name unrecognized by the powerful. Your term is destined to be a single 2-year stint, and you feel the brevity of it, the pressure to make some mark, however small, on the national stage. The air is thick with the tension of expansion, of manifest destiny, and most immediately of the war with Mexico. You came to Washington largely supporting the Whig Party line, which was skeptical of the war effort from the start. But being here, hearing the jingoistic speeches from the Democrats, seeing the way President Polk maneuvers, solidifies your opposition into something harder, more concrete. You don't just doubt the war, you come to believe it is fundamentally unjust, a land grab provoked by a president eager for glory and territory. So, you decide to speak, you rise in the House, your height making you loom even in the large chamber, and you deliver a speech that will, for a time, define you as a politician, and not in a good way. You challenge President Polk to name the exact spot on American soil where blood was first shed, arguing that the conflict was initiated on disputed land. These become known as your spot resolutions, a lawyerly, precise, and deeply unpopular attack on a popular war. The mainstream historical fact of this period is the sheer political courage, or folly, of this stance. The country is riding a wave of patriotic fervor. Newspapers are filled with tales of American heroism at Buena Vista and Veracruz. And here you are, the lone congressman from Illinois, essentially calling the president a liar and the war a fraud. The backlash is immediate and vicious. Back in your district, the Illinois State Register labels you the Benedict Arnold of our district. Your political friends write to you in a panic. You have, in one speech, likely torpedoed any chance of re-election. You feel the isolation keenly. The quirky fringe tidbit from this otherwise grim period is your brief foray into the world of invention. Perhaps seeking a distraction from the political storm, you becomes the only U.S. president to ever hold a patent. It's for a device to buoy steamboats over shallow shoals, a series of inflatable bellows triggered by the crew. You had witnessed boats getting stuck on your river journeys, and your mind, ever practical, ever engineering, had worked on a solution. The model you have built sits in your boarding house room, a curious artifact of a mind that never stops trying to solve problems, even as your political career threatens to run aground.
Historians still argue whether your stance against the Mexican-American War was a profound act of conscience, an early testament to your moral compass regarding executive power and unjust conflict, or a catastrophic political miscalculation born of a freshman congressman's naivete. Was it the first flowering of the principle that would later define you, or was it simply bad politics? The debate hinges on whether you understood the full cost of your principles in that moment. You did. The letters from home make it clear you are committing political suicide, but you feel a duty to what you see as the truth. The war ends while you are still in office, with the U.S. seizing a vast swath of territory from Mexico. You vote for the Wilmot Proviso, a failed attempt to ban slavery from these new lands. A vote that aligns you with the growing anti-slavery faction, but further alienates the more moderate elements back home. Your time in Washington ends not with a bang, but a whimper. You are offered the governorship of the Oregon Territory as a consolation prize, a way to exit the national stage gracefully. You and Mary consider it, but the distance is vast, the prospect bleak. You decline. You return to Springfield in 1849, your single term in Congress over, your political career seemingly in ruins. You are just Abraham Lincoln, prairie lawyer, once again. The ambitious young man who left for the capital has returned older, wiser, and politically radioactive. You throw yourself back into your law practice, the circuit rides, the mundane cases of property disputes and slander. The grand debates of the nation continue without you, the tension over slavery in the new territories simmering like a pot about to boil over. And you, for now, are on the sidelines, a man who took a stand and lost everything for it, watching and waiting for a crisis large enough to make such principles useful again.
The rhythm of the circuit is a kind of medicine. For nearly 6 months of the year, you are never in the same place for more than a few days, a traveling companion to a band of fellow lawyers and a judge, moving from one county seat to the next in a slow, rolling caravan of justice. You leave the quiet tensions of your Springfield home, the unspoken disappointment of your political career, and trade it all for the open prairie, the bottomless mud of spring roads, and the camaraderie of the inn's common room each night. Your law office is now a saddlebag, stuffed with legal writs, a spare shirt, and a well-thumbed copy of the Illinois statutes. You come to know these counties not by their maps, but by the feel of the road beneath your horse's hooves, the smell of the wood smoke from a particular farmhouse, the way the light falls across a certain stretch of timber in the late afternoon. This is the world of the prairie lawyer, and in it you find not just a living, but a kind of purpose. Your cases are the stuff of human nature, rarely lofty, always immediate. You defend a farmer accused of letting his hogs ruin a neighbor's crop. You help a merchant sue for an unpaid debt. You represent a young couple in a land dispute. This is not constitutional law. It is the law of the fence line and the ledger book. Your fame grows not for grand oratory, but for your simple, clear way of speaking to a jury of farmers. You strip away the legal jargon and talk about common sense, about fairness, about a day's honest labor. The mainstream historical fact of this period is the sheer volume and variety of your practice. Over 2 decades, you handle over 5,000 cases. You become a master of the mundane, an expert in the everyday conflicts that define life on the frontier. Your fee might be $5 for a case, or sometimes, for a client who has nothing, a quilt or a basket of turnips. The law is a trade, and you are a journeyman plying it. And it is here, in these crowded, stuffy county courtrooms, that your legend acquires one of its most enduring and quirky tidbits, the Almanac case. The story goes that you were defending a man accused of murder, and the prosecution's key witness claimed to have seen the crime clearly by the light of a full moon. On cross-examination, you produced a farmer's almanac and forced the witness to admit that, on the night in question, the moon was in a different phase and would have been low on the horizon, providing scant illumination. The case collapsed. It was a brilliant theatrical move, using a common, everyday object to dismantle a lie. Whether it happened exactly as the legends tell is less important than what it represents, your deep understanding of the world your jurors lived in. You didn't need a fancy expert from the city. You had an almanac, the same one they all used to plant their crops.
Historians still argue whether your time as a circuit lawyer was a retreat from the moral questions of slavery or a crucial education in the hearts and minds of ordinary Illinoisans. Were you avoiding the big issue, burying yourself in petty lawsuits? Or were you building the trust and understanding of the very people whose support you would later need to save the Union? The debate often centers on your own representation of slave owners in cases involving the Fugitive Slave Act, a legal obligation you fulfilled as a lawyer, but one that seems at odds with your personal convictions. You operated within the system, even when you disliked its rules, a pragmatism that would later define your presidency. The circuit was your classroom, and the lessons were in human nature, in compromise, in the art of the possible. The evenings are the best part. After the court adjourns, the whole traveling band, judge, lawyers, sheriffs, gathers in the main room of a tavern or a boarding house. A fire crackles in the hearth, the smell of stew and pipe tobacco fills the air, and the stories begin. This is where you shine. You become the center of the room, not with lofty speeches, but with jokes, anecdotes, and witty observations. Your laugh is a high, startling cackle that cuts through the murmur of conversation. You tell long, winding stories about your days in Indiana, about odd characters you've met, and everyone listens, their weariness forgotten for a while. In these moments, the melancholy that often grips you is held at bay by the warmth of fellowship and the simple pleasure of a story well told.
You are building something more valuable than a legal reputation here. You're building a network of friendships and a deep, intuitive understanding of the American people, a knowledge that no amount of reading in Washington could ever provide. The saddle is your desk, the courtroom your pulpit, and the open road your true, unfinished home.
The law practice, for all its camaraderie and routine, cannot fully insulate you from the world's tremors. It's 1854, and you're riding the circuit, the dust of the road familiar on your boots, when the news arrives like a physical blow. Congress, under the relentless engine of Stephen Douglas's ambition, has passed the Kansas-Nebraska Act. The principle is simple and, to your mind, catastrophic. It overturns the Missouri Compromise and declares that the question of slavery in the new territories will be decided by popular sovereignty, by the vote of the settlers themselves. It's as if a doctor, unable to cure a fever, has decided to let the patient decide whether to live or die. The delicate, decades-old containment of slavery, the uneasy agreement that had held a fragile peace, has been shattered. The volcano, which you had watched smolder from a distance, is now actively spewing ash, and the political ground beneath your feet feels hot and unsteady. You read the dispatches in a county newspaper, the print smudged from passing through many hands. The words of the act are dry, legalistic, but their implication is a firestorm. It means slavery is no longer a Southern peculiarity, a thing to be tolerated where it exists. It is now a national cancer with the potential to spread anywhere, even to the free soil of Kansas, just next door. The moral wrong, which you have always felt in your bones, is now coupled with a dire political reality. The Whig Party, your political home, is crumbling under the strain, unable to form a coherent response. The comfortable abstractions of your law books, the clear lines of property disputes, feel suddenly trivial. This is different. This is about the soul of the Republic, and the sound you hear is the cracking of its foundation. The mainstream historical fact that galvanizes you and the new Republican Party is the immediate violent result of this law: bleeding Kansas. Pro-slavery border ruffians and anti-slavery free staters flood into the territory, not with plows, but with Sharps rifles. The debates are no longer in Congress. They are in burned-out farmhouses and along bloody creek beds. The newspaper reports of the sacking of Lawrence and the retaliatory Potawatomi massacre by John Brown read like dispatches from a civil war, which, in a sense, they are. This violence is the tangible proof of your fears, the manifestation of what happens when a moral question is thrown to the wolves of popular passion. You follow these events not as a distant observer, but as a man who understands that the same forces could soon tear Illinois and the nation apart.
And it is in this simmering cauldron that a more personal, quirky tidbit emerges, one that reveals the depth of your private struggle. You were visiting, as you often do, with your closest friend, Joshua Speed, in his Kentucky home, a slave state. One morning, you lead him out to a secluded spot on his own property. You have something to show him. It's a slave auction poster, advertising the sale of a Negro woman and her children. The ink is fresh, the reality of it brutal and ordinary. You point to it and tell Speed in a low, intense voice that if you ever get the chance to hit slavery, you will hit it hard. It's a moment of startling intimacy and resolve, a quiet promise made not on a public stage, but in the shadow of the very institution you despise. It's a fringe moment, unrecorded in official documents, but it speaks to a fire being stoked in private, a determination that goes beyond political calculation. Historians still argue whether your primary motivation in opposing the expansion of slavery was a deep-seated moral revulsion or a political and economic vision for a nation of free white labor. Was the House-divided speech a cry of moral outrage or a strategic warning about the incompatibility of two economic systems? The open scholarly debate often pivots on your own words, which consistently condemned slavery as a monstrous injustice while also acknowledging the political and constitutional realities of its existence in the South. You are not an abolitionist calling for immediate uncompensated emancipation. You are a politician seeking to first choke its growth, believing that placing it in the course of ultimate extinction is the only way to save the Union itself. So you begin to speak again, not in courtrooms, but in town squares and halls. The old fire for politics, which had banked to embers after your congressional term, is now a roaring blaze. Your words are different now, heavier, infused with a new urgency. You talk of a house divided. You dissect the Dred Scott decision with logical fury, and you frame the conflict not as a mere political squabble, but as a fundamental test of the nation's founding proposition. The prairie lawyer is receding. The moral philosopher and the political strategist are merging into something new, something the country has not yet seen. The saddlebags of legal briefs are being swapped for the pages of political speeches. And the road you travel now leads not to the next county seat, but toward a collision with history itself.
The air in the town squares of Illinois in the fall of 1858 is thick with more than just the smell of burning leaves and roasting peanuts. It crackles with a rare, raw electricity, the kind generated when two fundamentally different visions of America's future are about to collide in public, over and over again. You are challenging the little giant Stephen A. Douglas for his United States Senate seat, and the agreed-upon format is a series of 7 debates, staged across the state like a traveling political circus. The stakes are national. Newspapers from New York to New Orleans send reporters, their telegraph wires ready to carry every word, every insult, every nuance to a country holding its breath. You are no longer just a prairie lawyer. You are the standard-bearer for a new anti-slavery coalition, and Douglas is the most powerful Democrat in the North, a man who believes he can thread the needle of this crisis with popular sovereignty. The physical contrast between you and your opponent is a spectacle in itself. Douglas is a compact, bustling cannonball of a man, impeccably dressed, with a voice that booms and rolls across the crowds with theatrical force. He paces the platform, jabbing the air with his finger, all passion and fire. You, on the other hand, are all angles and patience. You stand still, your tall frame seeming to unfold slowly as you begin to speak. Your voice is a higher, reedy instrument that initially disappoints the crowd. But then you start to build your case, layer by logical layer, like a stonemason building a wall. Your arguments are not designed for a single dramatic burst. They are built to endure, to seep into the listener's mind long after the cheering has died down. The mainstream historical fact that defines these debates is the central, relentless question you put to Douglas. Can the people of a territory legally exclude slavery from its limits before forming a state constitution? It becomes known as the Freeport Doctrine, and Douglas's answer, that they can by refusing to pass the necessary police laws, pleases the Illinois voters, but alienates the South, fracturing the Democratic Party and creating an opening that would prove crucial 2 years later.
The sheer exhaustion of the campaign is a force in itself. This is not a series of sound bites. Each debate lasts 3 hours, with one candidate speaking for an hour, the other for an hour and a half, and the first then getting a 30-minute rebuttal. You travel by train, by carriage, often through the night, arriving in the next town rumpled and weary, your mind a jumble of precedents and prepared lines. The quirky, fringe tidbit that emerges from this grueling schedule involves your pre-debate preparation, or lack thereof. While Douglas often arrives with an entourage and pre-written speeches, you are frequently seen in the hours before a debate sitting on a porch or a tree stump, slowly reading through a pile of newspapers, seemingly casual.
But then you'd take a snippet of an argument from one, a fact from another, and weave them together extemporaneously on stage, your mind a nimble loom crafting a response in real time. There's even a story, likely apocryphal but telling, that before one debate, a supporter handed you a glass of whiskey to steady your nerves. You took a sip, grimaced, and said, "Well, if I were to drink that, I wouldn't have a nerve left in me." You preferred to face the little giant with a clear head, your only weapon, the sharp, unadorned blade of your logic. Historians still argue whether you actually lost the Senate race of 1858. On the surface, the answer is yes. The Illinois legislature, still apportioned in a way that favored the Democratic-leaning southern part of the state, re-elected Douglas. But the open scholarly debate centers on whether you achieved a far more important victory. The national publicity from these debates made you a household name. Your face, your arguments against the expansion of slavery were now known from Maine to Mississippi. You had forced the most powerful Democrat in the country into a corner, exposing the fatal flaw in his popular sovereignty doctrine. In losing the battle, you had positioned yourself to win the war. The letters that pour into your Springfield law office after the debates are not from Illinois politicians, but from New England industrialists and Ohio farmers, all addressing you as a national leader.
You return to Springfield, to Mary and your boys. The Senate seat lost. There is a bitter taste of defeat, the familiar sting of political failure. But it feels different this time. The energy you felt on the campaign trail, the sense of a cause larger than yourself, doesn't dissipate. It settles inside you, a low, steady hum. You unpack your bag, hang up your worn debate coat, and look at the map of the United States on your wall. The lines between free and slave are blurring, bleeding into the territories. The debates with Douglas were not the end of something. They were the opening salvo. You can feel the ground shifting, the nation's center unable to hold. And you know, with a certainty that is both thrilling and terrifying, that you are not done speaking. The platform is about to get much, much bigger.
The whirlwind of the debates leaves you back in Springfield, but the world has shifted. Your law office, once a sanctuary of dusty books and mundane disputes, now feels like the quiet eye of a gathering storm. Letters arrive not just from Illinois, but from New York, Boston, and Philadelphia, addressed to the Honorable Abraham Lincoln, a title that feels both foreign and faintly ridiculous. You are a national figure now, a name whispered in political clubs and printed in newspapers as a potential candidate for the highest office in the land. The Republican Party, a fragile new vessel built to navigate the turbulent waters of the slavery crisis, is searching for a captain who can steer it to victory without crashing it on the rocks of extremism. Your name, thanks to your moderate stance and your logical dismantling of Douglas, is on a very short list. The convention is set for Chicago, a booming, brash city that seems to embody the raw energy of the North. And you decide to stay home in Springfield, preferring the agonizing weight of your parlor to the chaotic intrigue of the smoke-filled rooms. The waiting is its own special kind of torture. You try to maintain a routine, visiting your law office, chatting with neighbors, but every conversation feels strained, every handshake loaded with unasked questions. You are a man who prefers action, and this passive role, this being a piece on a national chessboard, grates on you. You tell jokes, of course, your default defense against anxiety. You compare the political speculation to trying to guess the weight of a prize pumpkin at a county fair. A lot of loud opinions based on very little actual information. Meanwhile, in Chicago, your managers, men like the formidable Judge David Davis, are working with a ferocity that would shock you. They are not just making speeches, they are making deals, packing the galleries with your supporters, and leveraging every political IOU they can find.
The frontrunner is William H. Seward of New York, a seasoned statesman with a powerful organization. You are the dark horse, the prairie lawyer, the compromise candidate. Then, on May 18, 1860, the day of the nomination, the telegraph wires between Chicago and Springfield become the nation's trembling nerves. You spend the day in a state of forced calm, trying to distract yourself at the office of the Illinois State Journal. The first ballot comes in. Seward leads, but you are a strong second. The second ballot, you close the gap, the momentum shifting like a prairie wind. The tension in the newspaper office is a physical thing, a thickness in the air that makes it hard to breathe. You excuse yourself and walk across the street to a friend's office for a game of handball, a bizarre and wonderfully human attempt to sweat out the anxiety. This is the mainstream historical fact, the three-ballot drama of the Republican National Convention, where Seward's early lead was systematically eroded by the skilled maneuvering of your team, and the growing sense that you, not Seward, were the most electable candidate, the one who could carry the crucial swing states of the lower north.
The quirky, fringe tidbit that emerges from this day is the legend of the telegraph operator's chair. The story goes that as the votes were being tallied on the second ballot, a crucial delegate from Pennsylvania, Simon Cameron, was seen being literally carried in his chair by your supporters from the Seward section of the convention hall over to the Lincoln section, a physical representation of his vote switching sides. It's an image so perfectly theatrical, it feels like a scene from a play. The fate of the nation hinging on a man being carried in a chair across a crowded room. Whether it happened exactly that way is less important than the truth it conveys. Your nomination was not an accident, it was a masterfully executed political operation. Historians still argue whether your victory was a triumph of your manager's backroom deals, including promises of cabinet posts, or a genuine reflection of the delegates' belief that you were the most electable and principled candidate. Did David Davis, in his tireless efforts, promise roles in a future Lincoln administration to secure the votes of key delegations? The open scholarly debate continues, with some seeing a cynical political bargain and others a necessary and pragmatic coalition building. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, a blend of idealistic support and hard-nosed political calculation. Then, the sound you've been waiting for, the clatter of the telegraph key from the office next door. A messenger boy bursts out, a slip of paper in his hand, his face a wide-eyed telegram of its own. He doesn't need to say a word. The crowd that is gathered in the street outside seems to understand simultaneously, and a roar goes up that shakes the very windows of the building. You take the paper. The third ballot is complete. You have won the nomination for President of the United States. There is a moment of stunned silence, and you look up at the faces staring at you, and you simply say, "Well, there's a little woman on 8th Street who will want to hear this." You meant Mary, of course. And with that, you turn and begin the walk home, the noise of the celebrating crowd following you like a wave, the weight of a fractured nation settling onto your shoulders with every step. The waiting is over. The real work is about to begin.
The victory parade feels like it happened to someone else. The cheers have faded, replaced by the ominous silence of telegrams from the Deep South and the frantic scratching of your own pen. The months between your election and your inauguration are a special kind of hell, an interregnum of powerlessness where you can only watch as the House divides, plank by plank. You are the president-elect, but you have no authority, no army, no voice beyond the words you write. From your makeshift office in a back room of the Springfield State House, you send out a steady stream of letters, each one a careful attempt to pour water on a fire that is rapidly becoming a conflagration. South Carolina secedes first, a dramatic, defiant act that feels like the first brick being pulled from a foundation. Then Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas, the Confederacy congealing like a blood clot in the nation's heart.
You read the newspapers, your face a mask of grim calm, while inside, a storm rages. Your correspondence during this period is a masterclass in anxious persuasion. You write to every Republican senator and congressman, urging party unity, begging them to hold the line against any compromise that would extend slavery into the territories. You write to Unionists in the border states, Virginia, Kentucky, Maryland, pleading with them to stay, to be the voice of reason. The most famous of these letters is to your old rival, now your ally, William Seward, whom you've asked to be your Secretary of State. You write to him of the political horizon being darkened every day, and you urge him to neither admit nor deny nor argue against the secessionists' complaints. It's a strategy of masterful inactivity, of refusing to legitimize their cause with a response. But it feels like trying to stop an avalanche by holding up a hand. The mainstream historical fact of this crisis is the failure of the last-ditch compromise efforts, most notably the Crittenden Compromise, which sought to extend the Missouri Compromise line to the Pacific. You are immovable on this point, telling your allies in Congress that if any such compromise passes, I will have to take back my oath to be faithful to the Republican platform. The line must be drawn here.
The pressure is immense. Visitors stream into Springfield. A parade of politicians, journalists, and office seekers, all wanting a piece of you, all offering advice, most of it contradictory. Your home becomes a public thoroughfare, and Mary, thrilled by the attention at first, begins to fray under the constant scrutiny. The quirky, fringe tidbit that emerges from this chaotic time is the story of the Whisker Letter. An 11-year-old girl from New York named Grace Bedell writes you a note suggesting that you would look more presidential and win more votes if you grew a beard. All the ladies like whiskers, she writes, and they would tease their husbands to vote for you. You are famously homely, and the letter amuses you. In your response, you ask, as to the whiskers, having never worn any, don't you think people would call it a piece of silly affection if I were to begin it now? But you do begin, and by the time you leave Springfield for Washington, a fledgling beard is covering your gaunt cheeks, a small, personal change in the face of unimaginable national upheaval. It's a human moment, a connection to an ordinary citizen in the midst of the political maelstrom. Historians still argue whether your steadfast refusal to compromise on the extension of slavery during the secession winter was a profound moral stand that saved the soul of the nation, or a catastrophic failure of leadership that made a bloody war inevitable. Could a different approach, a more flexible stance, have kept the border states in the Union and isolated the radical Deep South, leading to a less violent resolution? The open scholarly debate pits your principles against your pragmatism, questioning if the cost of those principles was simply too high. But you see no room for maneuver. To compromise on the central tenet of your party, the reason for your election would be to surrender the future of the nation to the very system you believe is poisoning it. The letters you write are not just words. They are anchors, thrown into a raging sea, trying to hold the ship of state in place until you can finally take the helm. The day of your departure from Springfield arrives, cold and drizzly. The train station is packed with faces you have known your whole adult life, law partners, circuit riding companions, neighbors. The weight of the moment is immense. You stand on the platform of the train car, your new beard not quite hiding the deep lines of strain on your face. You have prepared a few words. To this place and the kindness of these people, I owe everything. You begin, your voice thick with emotion. You speak of the task before you being greater than that which rested upon Washington himself. Then you say the words that will echo through history. I now leave, not knowing when or whether ever I may return. It is not a triumphant farewell. It is a somber acknowledgement of the abyss ahead. You step into the train car, the crowd's cheers mingling with their sobs,
and the locomotive lurches forward. You are leaving home, perhaps for the last time, heading east toward a capital city that is already half enemy territory. Your suitcase filled not with plans for a new administration, but with pleas for a union that is already, in everything but name, broken.
The White House is not a home. It is a drafty, overstaffed office building where you happen to sleep, and even that is a negotiable fact. Your bedroom becomes a second office. The blankets often pushed aside to make room for maps of Virginia, their lines marked with the tentative, worrying movements of little flags representing armies. The sheer volume of paper is the first and most relentless shock. It arrives in tides on your desk, requisitions for blankets, promotions for colonels, angry letters from governors, desperate pleas from inventors with new designs for repeating rifles or explosive devices. You are not just the president, you are the commander-in-chief of an army that is learning how to be an army. And you are the final signature on every document that keeps it fed, clothed, and pointed in the right direction. The late-night oil lamp burns down, its light flickering across pages filled with casualty lists, each name a small, sharp stone added to the heavy collection you carry in your own heart. Your days take on a brutal rhythm. Mornings are for the public opinion baths, your term for the open door hours, when any citizen, from a famous banker to a dirt farmer from Ohio, can line up and demand a moment of your time. You sit through it all, listening to the complaints, the schemes, the job requests, because you believe in it, because you need to hear the sound of the people you are trying to save. The mainstream historical fact of your leadership style is this relentless, hands-on involvement in the war effort. You spend hours in the War Department's telegraph office, the room humming with the click of the keys, the slips of paper bringing you the raw, unvarnished news from the front in near real time. It is here you first learn of the chaos at Bull Run, the Union Army's panicked retreat back to Washington. It is here you read the desperate messages from McClellan, forever promising in advance that never seems to materialize. You are becoming your own general, studying military strategy textbooks by night, trying to comprehend the art of war through the same determined self-education you once applied to the law. And it is in this maelstrom of high strategy and crushing bureaucracy that the most human, quirky tidbits emerge. There is the legendary day a woman from Tennessee is shown into your office demanding a pass through the Union lines to visit her family. You listen patiently, then ask if she has any relatives fighting for the Confederacy. Yes, she admits, 3 sons. You pause, a faint smile touching your lips. Well, you say, I have millions of them. It's a joke, but it's also a perfect summary of your burden. Then there are the inventors. One demonstrates a new kind of warship in the filled bathtub of your room, splashing water all over the floor. Another arrives with a steam-powered war wagon that he claims can win the war. And you, despite your exhaustion, take the time to look over his schematics, knowing it's probably nonsense, but unwilling to dismiss any possibility, any spark of ingenuity that might end the bleeding sooner.
Historians still argue whether your deep immersion in the daily minutiae of the war was a necessary check on incompetent generals and a bloated bureaucracy, or a form of debilitating micromanagement that stretched your energies too thin. Did your constant pressure on McClellan, for instance, stem from a clearer strategic vision, or from a civilian's impatience with military caution? The open scholarly debate often questions whether a more detached, executive-style president would have been more effective, or if your unique personal touch was the only glue that could hold the war effort together in its darkest early days. You didn't have the luxury of that debate. For you, every telegram about a shortage of horseshoes, every pleading letter from a mother about her imprisoned son is a thread in the fabric of the war, and you feel responsible for pulling on every single one. The nights are the hardest. When the last petitioner has left and the stacks of paper have been temporarily cleared, the silence of the mansion amplifies the noise in your head. Your son Willie is ill, a fever that the doctors cannot break, and Mary is frantic with a grief you share, but must somehow manage alongside the nation's. You pace the long, dark hallways, your footsteps echoing in the emptiness. You stop by Willie's room, listening to his labored breathing, then wander down to the telegraph office again, seeking the cold, hard certainty of clicking keys and written words, a reality less painful than the one in the sick room upstairs. The war is a storm raging outside, and you are the lonely figure at the center, trying to read the maps by the light of a guttering lamp, your hand pausing as you sign another order, another decision that will send young men marching into the thunder. The weight of the desk is the weight of the nation, and you feel the grain of the wood in your bones.
The proclamation sits on your desk, a document of such immense weight that it seems to make the very wood groan. It is not one paper, but several drafts, each covered in your tight, looping script. Words crossed out, phrases added, the legal language polished and repolished until it gleams with a terrible final clarity. You have known from the beginning that this war is about slavery. You said it was to save the Union, and that was true, but a Union preserved with slavery intact would be a hollow victory, a body kept alive after its soul has fled. The pressure is immense from the radicals in your own party demanding you strike the blow, and from the border states and Northern Democrats warning that any move against slavery will shatter the Union forever. You are walking a tightrope strung across the national abyss, and the proclamation is the pole you will use to balance. You carry the first draft with you, folded in an inside pocket for days. You take it out in quiet moments, reading it over, feeling the shape of the words in your mouth. That on the first day of January, in the year of our Lord 1863, all persons held as slaves within any state shall be then thenceforward and forever free. They are not just words. They are a seismic shock waiting to be triggered. You know the legal reasoning is everything. You justify it not as an act of morality, but as a fit and necessary war measure, a way to deprive the rebellion of its labor force and strike at the heart of its economic engine. This is the mainstream historical fact that you cling to, the constitutional peg on which you hang this revolutionary act. You are using your power as commander-in-chief to confiscate enemy property, and in the Confederacy, the most valuable property is human beings. The decision is not made in a vacuum. The war grinds on, a bloody stalemate. McClellan's Peninsula campaign has failed, and the casualty lists from battles like Shiloh have left the nation reeling. You need a victory, a clear sign from God or fate that this is the right course. It comes, barely, at Antietam. Though Lee lets Lee's army escape, the Confederate invasion of the North is halted. The battlefield is the single bloodiest day in American history, a grim and costly draw, but you seize upon it as the justification you need. 5 days later, you gather your cabinet. The quirky fringe tidbit from this monumental meeting is your opening gambit. Before you even reveal the proclamation, you read to them from a book by the humorist Artemus Ward, a chapter called High-Handed Outrage at Utica. It's a bizarre, absurd story, and your cabinet sits in stunned silence, wondering if the pressure has finally broken you. Then you look up, your face grim, and say, "Gentlemen, why don't you laugh? With the fearful strain that is upon me night and day, if I did not laugh, I should die." You need that moment of release, a crack in the immense pressure, before you place the document on the table and change the course of the war. Historians still argue whether the Emancipation Proclamation was primarily a moral act, the culmination of a lifelong hatred of slavery, or a purely military and political calculation designed to cripple the Confederacy, prevent European recognition, and energize the Northern war effort. The open scholarly debate often centers on its limitations. It only freed slaves in the rebelling states, leaving those in the border states in bondage. Was it, as some critics charged, a paper promise that freed not a single person you actually had the power to free? Or was it the crucial pivot, the moment the war to save the Union became the war to free a people, changing it from a political conflict into a moral crusade? You understood both sides of that coin. You famously said you would save the Union without freeing any slaves if you could, and if you could save it by freeing all the slaves, you would do that. Events had forced your hand, and in doing so, had given the nation a new, higher purpose. The public announcement is made on September 22, 1862. The reaction is as divided as the country itself. Abolitionists, while noting its limitations, rejoice. Northern Democrats decry it as a desperate, tyrannical act that will prolong the war. In the South, it confirms every fear of a race war and solidifies their resolve. But the most profound effect is when you can only hear about in reports and rumors. The news seeps into the slave quarters of the Confederacy, passed along a whispered grapevine. The president, a man they have never seen, has declared them free. It is a promise, a beacon, a reason to risk everything and run toward the Union Army lines. The war is no longer a distant white man's conflict. It is now their fight for liberation. You sit at your desk after the announcement, the ink dry, the telegrams of both praise and condemnation piling up. You have thrown a stone into the pond of history, and the ripples are spreading, touching shores you cannot yet see. The weight is still there, but it has shifted. It is no longer just the weight of preserving something. It is now the terrifying, exhilarating weight of creating something new.
The telegraph office becomes your sanctuary and your torture chamber. The constant click-clack of the keys is the heartbeat of the war, a staccato rhythm reporting victories that are never quite complete and defeats that are always too total. You are here so often that the operators no longer stand when you enter. They simply nod and hand you the latest slips of paper, the ink still damp with bad news. The maps on the wall are no longer abstract diagrams. They are living, bleeding landscapes. You know the names of the creeks and crossroads now. Antietam, Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, not as geography, but as cemeteries. The sheer cost of it all begins to wear on you in a way that no political defeat ever could. The numbers in the reports, 5,000 casualties, 10,000, become a chorus of ghosts whispering in the hallways of your mind. You are the commander-in-chief, but the command feels like a terrible, relentless tide you are trying to hold back with your bare hands. It is in this atmosphere of pervasive grief that your personal correspondence takes on a new, profound character. The letters you are now compelled to write are the hardest of your life. They are to parents, to wives, to children. You write to a Mrs. Lydia Bixby of Boston, who, according to a War Department report, has lost 5 sons in the conflict. Your letter to her will become one of your most famous, a masterpiece of condolence. I feel how weak and fruitless must be any words of mine which should attempt to beguile you from the grief of a loss so overwhelming. You pray the report of 5 sons is accurate, that this small, brutal arithmetic of sacrifice is correct, for to make such an error in such a context would be unthinkable. This is the mainstream historical fact of your leadership, the personalization of the war's cost. You don't delegate this duty. You insist on signing the death warrants for deserters, a grim task that forces you to look at the name and rank of each man, to remember that discipline in an army of volunteers is a fragile, terrible thing. You spend hours reviewing court-martial proceedings, searching for any reason, any mitigating circumstance to commute a sentence from death to imprisonment. Alongside this bottomless well of sorrow is the equally draining well of frustration with your generals. George B. McClellan, the young Napoleon, is the greatest source of this angst.
You created the Army of the Potomac, but he treats it as his personal possession, a beautiful, polished weapon he is afraid to unsheathe. The quirky fringe tidbit that perfectly captures this relationship is the story of the two of you waiting for a telegraphic update. McClellan had locked the door to the telegraph office and gone to a party, leaving you, the President of the United States, standing alone in the hallway, unable to access the information you needed to lead the country. The image is almost comical in its absurdity, the most powerful man in the nation locked out by his own subordinate. It's a moment that speaks volumes about the struggle for control, about the arrogance of military command, and about your own surprising patience, a patience that would eventually, inevitably, run out.
Historians still argue whether your hands-on approach to military strategy and your constant cycling through generals, from McDowell to McClellan to Burnside to Hooker, was a necessary response to a crisis of incompetent leadership or a destabilizing interference that prevented any one commander from developing a coherent, long-term plan. The open scholarly debate questions if a more traditional president, one who appointed a general and then left him to his work, would have found victory sooner, or if the unique political and moral dimensions of this war required your constant, relentless pressure. You were learning war as you waged it, and your textbooks were the telegrams from the front and the faces of the grieving mothers who waited in line outside your office. The pressure manifests physically. The stories of your gaunt appearance, the dark circles under your eyes, become part of the national narrative. You lose weight. Your clothes hang on your frame like sacks. You are known to burst into fits of laughter in the middle of serious meetings, a release valve for a pressure cooker of stress that no human was meant to contain. You dream, you tell a friend, of sailing on a vast, unknown body of water, moving toward a dark, indefinite shore, a perfect metaphor for the war itself. The grief for the dead, the frustration with the living, and the weight of the entire endeavor are carving new lines on your face, aging you years for every month that passes. You are no longer just presiding over a war. You are being consumed by it. Your own vitality, fuel for the furnace of the nation's conflict. The pen you use to write condolences feels heavier than any axe you ever swung in your youth. Each signature an acknowledgement of a life lost under your command.
The invitation to say a few appropriate remarks at the dedication of a new cemetery at Gettysburg feels at first like a formality, a burden added to a mountain of burdens. The main oration is to be delivered by the famed Edward Everett, a man who can speak for 2 hours without seeming to draw breath. You are the president. Your presence is required, but your words are expected to be brief, a ceremonial ribbon to be cut after the real speech is over. The journey to Pennsylvania is a slow, rattling affair by train, the carriage cold and damp. You feel unwell, a faint dizziness you attribute to the strain and the poor sleep. The town of Gettysburg itself is still a raw wound on the landscape. Though months have passed, the air still carries the faint metallic smell of death, and the earth on the new graves is dark, freshly turned. You see the crutches, the empty sleeves, the young men with old eyes, and the weight of the 50,000 casualties from those 3 days settles deep in your bones. The day of the dedication is bright and cold. You sit on the platform, listening as Edward Everett does indeed speak for 2 hours. He is magnificent, weaving together classical allusions and historical parallels, his voice a powerful instrument that rolls across the crowd. It is everything a 19th century audience expects from great oratory. And then it is your turn. You stand, adjust your spectacles, and look out at the sea of faces, many of them still marked by the grief of having loved ones buried in the field behind you. You begin, your voice not a booming baritone, but that higher, reedy instrument, and you speak for just 2 minutes. The mainstream historical fact of this moment is the sheer, radical brevity of your address. In a world of long-winded speeches, you offer 272 words.
You do not mention Gettysburg. You do not mention the Union or the Confederacy. You speak of a new birth of freedom, of government, of, by, and for the people. You redefine the war itself, not as a fight to save the old Union, but as a test of whether a nation conceived in liberty can long endure. The reaction, in the moment, is mixed. Some in the crowd, still adjusting their ears from Everett's performance, are barely settled before you are finished. There is a smattering of applause, polite but confused. A photographer, still fumbling with his equipment, misses the shot entirely. You yourself reportedly turn to your bodyguard and say, "That speech won't scour. It is a flat failure." You believe your words have fallen on deaf ears, that they were too simple, too plain, too quick. The quirky fringe tidbit that emerges from this trip involves your illness. Many historians now believe you are in the early stages of a mild smallpox infection, suffering from fever and weakness as you delivered one of the most important speeches in human history. The image is strangely fitting. The leader of a diseased nation, himself feverish, speaking of a new birth of health and freedom from a field of death.
Historians still argue whether the Gettysburg Address was a carefully crafted masterpiece, written and rewritten over many days, or a more spontaneous, almost spiritual utterance that came to you in the moment, refined by the solemnity of the place. The open scholarly debate centers on the several slightly different manuscript versions that exist in your hand. Did you revise it afterward to perfect it, or are the differences a sign of its evolving meaning even to you? The truth is, its power was not in its immediate reception, but in its echo. The newspapers the next day are divided along partisan lines, but the words themselves begin to seep into the national consciousness. They are short enough to be memorized, profound enough to be pondered. You had not spoken to the crowd on that platform. You had spoken to the future. You returned to Washington, still feeling unwell, the dusty roads of Pennsylvania swapped for the muddy ones of the capital. The war grinds on, but something has shifted, if not on the battlefield, then in the metaphysical landscape of the conflict. The speech, which you thought a failure, begins to appear in newspapers across the North. People cut it out and save it. They read it to their families. They sense, even if they cannot articulate it, that you have given them a new reason to endure the sacrifice. The war is no longer just about flags and territory. It is about an idea, a proposition. The ghost of the address follows you back to the White House, a quiet companion to the louder, more immediate ghosts of the casualty reports. You put the handwritten pages of your speech in a drawer, a task completed, and turn your tired eyes back to the maps, to the telegrams, to the endless line of petitioners, unaware that the few words you spoke in a field in Pennsylvania will outlive every general's order, every piece of legislation, and every one of the weary bones in your body.
The weight of the war is a constant, a low, gray pressure that permeates every room of the White House. But it is in the strange, small moments that you find and provide pockets of relief. The machinery of death grinds on. The telegrams, the casualty lists, the strategic debates with your generals. But life, stubbornly, insistently, continues to interrupt. Your son Tad, a whirlwind of energy, turns the solemn corridors of the executive mansion into his personal racetrack, his laughter a startling, welcome sound against the backdrop of murmured strategy sessions. He and his brother Willie, before his death, had once commandeered a team of gardeners to build a fort on the roof, defending the White House from imaginary rebels. Now you indulge Tad's whims, finding in his innocence a necessary anchor to a world not defined by conflict. It is within this juxtaposition of the profound and the mundane that your role as president expands to include duties no founding father could have ever anticipated. The most famous of these is the Thanksgiving turkey pardon, though no one calls it that yet.
The story, as it will be told, is that in the autumn of 1863, your son Tad adopts a turkey destined for the Christmas table, naming him Jack and pleading for its life. When the time comes for the bird's execution, Tad bursts into a cabinet meeting begging for a reprieve. You, with a solemnity usually reserved for signing legislation, officially pardon the turkey, a small act of mercy in a world drowning in brutality. It's a quirky fringe tidbit that will grow into a national tradition, a testament to the way a father's love for his son can create a piece of folklore that outlasts statutes and speeches. But it's not the only one. You are constantly presented with inventions from desperate or brilliant citizens, a machine for peeling apples, a newfangled mechanical horse, a design for a wooden warship. You examine them all with genuine interest, for you are at heart still the man who held a patent, who believed in the power of a practical solution to a tangible problem. The mainstream historical fact of this period, however, is your formalization of the National Day of Thanksgiving. In the midst of the war's darkest hours, you issue a proclamation, written by Secretary of State Seward but bearing your name and authority, setting aside the last Thursday of November as a day of national thanksgiving and praise. It is a stunning act of political and spiritual optimism. You ask a nation torn in half, drowning in grief, to pause and give thanks for the blessings of fruitful fields and healthful skies, which still persist despite the civil war of unequaled magnitude and severity. It is an attempt to remind people of what they're fighting for, to point toward a horizon beyond the smoke and carnage. You call for the nation to commend to his tender care all those who have become widows, orphans, mourners, or sufferers in the lamentable civil strife, and to heal the wounds of the nation. It is a presidential duty, but it feels like a prayer, one spoken into a storm.
Historians still argue whether your famous sense of humor, the constant stream of jokes, anecdotes, and witty asides, was a crucial coping mechanism, a way to vent the unbearable pressures of the war, or a calculated tool of leadership used to deflect criticism, charm opponents, and make complex points relatable. The open scholarly debate questions if the man who could laugh so easily was hiding a bottomless well of sorrow, or if the laughter was the genuine expression of a temperament that simply refused to be crushed by circumstance. You tell a congressman who criticizes General Grant for drinking too much whiskey that he should find out what brand Grant prefers so he can send a barrel of it to all his other generals. It's a joke, but it's also a fierce defense of the one man you have found who can actually fight and win. The laughter is not a denial of the horror, it is a way of surviving it. And so your days become a strange tapestry woven with threads of tragedy and whimsy. 1 hour you are meticulously reviewing the sentences of deserters, your pen hovering over a death warrant, your heart heavy with the awful calculus of justice and mercy. The next, you are on the floor with Tad, examining the intricate mechanics of a new toy train, or listening to the detailed bylaws of the White House Navy, a fleet of imaginary ships he commands in the bathtub. You sign the order that will send thousands of men into the wilderness, a brutal, bloody campaign of attrition, and then you walk downstairs to ensure the cook has spared the turkey. It is not a contradiction, but a synthesis. To bear the immense, you must cherish the small. To stare into the abyss of a nation tearing itself apart, you must also focus on the simple, uncomplicated plea of a boy for his pet's life. In these moments of wartime whimsy, you are not just preserving the Union, you are preserving your own humanity, and in doing so, offering a glimpse of the healed nation you dream of, one where laughter can once again exist without a shadow of grief clinging to its heels.
A fragile, tentative peace begins to seep into the national consciousness, a feeling as unfamiliar as silence after a long roar. It is early April 1865, and the telegrams from the front are no longer about movements and counter-movements, but about surrender. You read the dispatch from Grant. Lee has surrendered his Army of Northern Virginia at Appomattox Courthouse. The news spreads through Washington like a physical wave, and for the first time in 4 years, the sound that fills the air is not of marching boots, but of church bells and spontaneous, tearful celebrations. The street outside the White House is a sea of faces, all turned toward you, demanding a speech. You stand at the window, a candle in your hand, and you give them not a triumphalist rant, but a sober look ahead. You talk about Reconstruction, about bringing the Southern states back into the Union, and you even suggest, to the shock of some, that you would not be opposed to granting voting rights to some black men, particularly the very intelligent and those who have fought gallantly in our ranks. The crowd is jubilant, but you feel the weight of the next great task already settling upon you. The war is over. The peace, you know, will be its own, more complex battle. Your mind is consumed with the problem of reconciliation. How do you stitch a nation back together when the wounds are so deep and fresh? You spend your days in meetings, sketching out the fragile architecture of peace. You argue for malice toward none, with charity for all. Your last letters are filled with this spirit. You write to a general in Louisiana, urging him to allow the makeshift Confederate state government there to convene, to let them begin the process of returning to the Union. It is a controversial, forgiving stance that angers the radicals in your own party who want to punish the South. You were trying to build a bridge, and you were using your pen as the first plank. The mainstream historical fact of these final days is your active, hands-on planning for Reconstruction, a policy of leniency and rapid restoration that stands in stark contrast to the punitive measures that will follow your death. You believe that a swift, merciful reunion is the only way to truly end the war.
Yet, even in this moment of triumph, the old melancholy and a strange sense of foreboding cling to you. You tell your cabinet of a dream you had a few nights before, a dream that has now become one of the most famous and quirky tidbits of your legacy. You describe being on a mysterious phantom ship, moving rapidly toward a dark, indefinite shore. It was, you said, a recurring dream, and it had always preceded a great military event, like Antietam or Gettysburg. Now you wonder aloud what it could possibly mean, with the war all but won. It's a moment of eerie, almost supernatural introspection that hangs in the air, a fringe element of premonition that will be endlessly analyzed. Your wife Mary is deeply superstitious and is terrified by such talk, but you shrug it off, attributing it to the exhaustion and strain of the years. Historians still argue whether your vision for Reconstruction, had you lived, would have successfully healed the nation's wounds without the bitterness and backlash of the Jim Crow era, or if the racial and political divides were simply too deep for any policy, no matter how wise, to overcome. The open scholarly debate is one of the great what-ifs of American history. Would your unique blend of political skill, moral authority, and personal mercy have been enough to guide the country through a just and lasting peace? Or would you have been overwhelmed by the same forces of vengeance and resistance that ultimately undermined your successor? It is an unanswerable question, but one that speaks to the profound loss felt at the moment of your victory. On the afternoon of April 14th, Good Friday, the mood is light. The world feels new. You take a carriage ride with Mary and speak of the future, of traveling to Jerusalem after your term is over, of a life beyond the unbearable pressure of the presidency. For a few hours, you are just a husband, making plans with his wife. That evening, you decide to go to Ford's Theater. It is a last-minute decision, a desire to be among the people, to share in their joy. The play is a comedy, Our American Cousin. As you sit in the dark, private box, your bodyguard momentarily steps away, and your mind, for the first time in years, is perhaps not on war or policy, but on the simple, foolish plot unfolding on the stage below. The laughter of the audience fills the theater. It is the sound of a nation beginning to breathe again. In this final, quiet portrait, you are not the great emancipator or the commander-in-chief. You are a tired man, taking a moment of rest, your hand resting gently on Mary's, your eyes watching the play, unaware that the fragile piece you sketched in your letters is about to be shattered, and that the final, dark shore from your dream is waiting in the shadows just a few feet away.
And so we leave the ink-stained pages and the echoes of a fractured time. The scratch of the pen fades, the distant sounds of celebration and sorrow blend into a soft, uniform hum, like rain on a rooftop far away. The weight of those decisions, the grief of those telegrams, the immense burden of a nation's soul, it all begins to soften at the edges, becoming a story once more, a history that is now complete. You can let it go, just as the man at the center of it all finally and tragically had to let go of the world he worked so tirelessly to save. The arguments of scholars, the quirks of fate, the great and unanswerable questions, they can all drift away now on the quiet current of this night. There is no more need to analyze, to remember, to hold the weight. The journey is over. The lights in the White House are out. The desk is clear. The last letter has been sent. And in this deep, forgiving silence, you can simply rest, knowing that the story is told, the work is done, and peace, at long last, is yours to keep. Let the calm of history, settled and complete, wrap around you like a blanket, soothing the mind and easing the spirit into a deep and dreamless sleep, far from the battles and the speeches, cradled in the quiet aftermath of it all.
The news of the shot at Ford's Theater travels through the city not by telegram, but by a wave of human sound, a gasp that becomes a scream, then a murmur, then a wail that seems to rise from the very cobblestones of Washington. You are there, in the crowd that gathers outside the Peterson House, where they have carried the tall, wounded man across the street. The night air is cold, but the heat of so many bodies pressed together, all straining for a glimpse, for any word, creates a strange, suffocating warmth. Inside, in a small back room, the president lies diagonally on a too-short bed, his breathing labored, while the nation holds its breath with him. Mary Lincoln's sobs from the front parlor are a sharp counterpoint to the low, steady murmur of the doctors and officials. This is not how it was supposed to end. The war is won, the celebrations have barely died down, and now this, a sudden, violent puncture in the fabric of the new peace. The letters that have defined your life, the ones you wrote to generals and grieving mothers, are now being replaced by a new kind of correspondence. The frantic, disbelieving telegrams that are already clicking their way to every governor, every newspaper office, every family that had a son in the Union Army. Through the long night, as the candlelight flickers against the wallpaper, the story of the assassination unravels in hushed, horrified whispers. John Wilkes Booth, a famous actor, has leaped from the box and escaped on horseback. The conspiracy is wider than anyone first thought. Secretary of State Seward has been attacked in his own bed, brutally stabbed. The city is locking down, but the real lockdown is happening in the human heart. The mainstream historical fact that hardens in the cold dawn is the meticulous planning behind Booth's plot, not just to kill Lincoln, but to decapitate the entire government, to throw the victorious Union into chaos, and perhaps revive the Confederate cause. It was a desperate, theatrical act of vengeance, born from the same bitter hatred that you had sought to soothe with your calls for malice toward none. As the sun rises on April 15, 1865, the news is confirmed. Abraham Lincoln is dead. The cheering of just days before is now a universal groan of anguish. The quirky fringe tidbit that emerges from this tragedy involves the contents of Booth's pockets when he is finally cornered and killed days later. Among a compass, a dagger, and a diary, he carried several photographs of himself, as if he needed to be reminded of the face that had committed the deed, and a few lines of poetry, a bizarre testament to the actor's vanity and his twisted sense of destiny. He saw himself as a character in a grand drama, but the role he played was that of a nation's nightmare.
And then the letters begin to arrive. They flood the White House, sacks and sacks of them, from every state, from every walk of life. They are written on fine stationery and on rough homemade paper. They are from senators and from freed slaves, from school children and from old soldiers. They are all saying the same thing in 1,000 different ways. We have lost our father. You can almost hear the collective scratching of pens across the country, a nation trying to write its way through grief. One letter from a black Union soldier simply says, "We have lost our best friend." Another, from a young girl in New England, includes a pressed flower and a promise to be good forever if only God would bring him back. This outpouring is itself a historical phenomenon, the first time in American history that the death of a leader is felt as a personal loss by millions. Historians still argue whether the assassination, by making Lincoln a martyr, actually cemented the cause of Reconstruction and racial equality for a time, or if it ultimately made reconciliation with the South more difficult by removing the one leader who might have been able to bridge the gap with his unique blend of firmness and mercy. The open scholarly debate questions if Lincoln's lived leadership would have been more effective than his symbolic death in guiding the nation through the treacherous waters of peace. You walk through the streets of Washington in the days that follow, and the city is draped in black. Every building, every lamppost wears a mourning cloth. The silence is profound, broken only by the slow, funereal tolling of church bells. The train that carries Lincoln's body back to Springfield, the Lincoln Special, begins its long, winding journey across the North, and at every stop, in every city and hamlet, crowds gather to weep as the coffin passes. They are not mourning a president. They are mourning a man they felt they knew, a man whose words had been read in their newspapers, whose face was familiar from cartoons and photographs, whose sorrows and jokes had become part of the national conversation. The letters he wrote are now relics, and the words he spoke are now scripture. The man who stored mail in his hat and joked about turkey pardons is now frozen in time, his work unfinished, his pen stilled. The weight of what has been lost is immeasurable, and it settles not just on a nation, but on you, the listener, drawn into this intimate history, feeling the shock and the sorrow as if you were standing there in the crowd, watching the train pull away, taking the great emancipator home for the last time. The task of sorting through the physical aftermath of a life falls to others. After the funeral trains have completed their sad pilgrimage and the earth has settled over the grave in Springfield, the monumental collection of papers left behind in the White House and in your law offices must be dealt with. This is the unglamorous work of history. The boxing, the cataloging, the preserving of every scrap you ever wrote. The job falls primarily to your two private secretaries, John G. Nicolay and John Hay, young men who had been with you through the worst of the war, who had seen you at your most weary and your most determined. They are the gatekeepers of your legacy, the curators of your mind. They gather everything. The early, rough drafts of the Emancipation Proclamation with your careful edits,
the heartfelt letters to grieving mothers, the terse, frustrated notes to General McClellan, even the mundane memos about office supplies. They are assembling the raw material of your immortality, and they know it. The mainstream historical fact of this endeavor is its sheer scale and its eventual outcome. Nicolay and Hay would spend years organizing and annotating the papers, using them as the primary source for their massive 10-volume biography of you, a work that would shape your image for generations. But the collection itself would have a long and sometimes precarious journey, eventually finding a home in the Library of Congress, where it remains one of the most treasured archives of the American experience. As Nicolay and Hay work, they uncover the quirky, human traces you left behind. They find the little notes you scribbled to yourself on scraps of paper, filed away in drawers. There are lists of potential cabinet members, with names checked off or crossed out. There are doodles in the margins of serious documents, little sketches of faces, of trees, of what looks like a gallows. There is the famous letter to General Hooker, appointing him to command of the Army of the Potomac, in which you frankly tell him that you have heard he has said that the country needed a dictator. And then you add, only those generals who gain successes can set up dictators. What I now ask of you is military success, and I will risk the dictatorship. It was a breathtakingly candid and risky thing to put in writing, a perfect example of your unique managerial style. Part trust, part warning, all wrapped in a plain-spoken challenge. Then there are the fragments, the half-written ideas for speeches, the lines that never made it into the final drafts. One such fragment on the nature of slavery reads, "If A can prove, however conclusively, that he may, of right, enslave B, why may not B snatch the same argument and prove equally that he may enslave A?" It is a simple, logical trap set in a few lines of text, capturing the essential absurdity of the institution you helped destroy.
Historians still argue whether Nicolay and Hay's curation of your papers was a faithful representation of your thought process or a deliberate act of myth-making, shaping the narrative to present a more heroic, less complicated figure. The open scholarly debate often focuses on what might be missing, the more volatile, unguarded letters that may have been destroyed or lost, the private doubts you might have expressed that were never committed to paper, or if they were carefully filtered by your devoted secretaries. Did they protect your privacy, or did they sanitize your legacy? The truth is, every archive is a kind of tomb, and only what is placed inside survives for the future to examine. The papers they saved became the foundation of the Lincoln we know, but the man himself remains, in some ways, just out of reach, a figure seen through the glass of their devotion and the prism of their time. You can imagine the two Johns working by lamplight, surrounded by piles of your handwriting, the ghost of your presence almost palpable in the room. They can hear your voice in the lines, remember the circumstances under which you wrote them. Here is the angry response to a political enemy, written in a flash of heat, but then set aside and never sent. A lesson in restraint they witnessed firsthand. There is the tender letter to a young girl who had suggested you grow a beard, a reminder that even in the midst of war, you took time for the smallest of citizens. They are not just filing documents, they are building a monument made of paper and ink, a testament to the power of words to shape a nation. As they box up the last of the papers, preparing them for their journey to the Library of Congress, they are ensuring that your voice, your reasoning, your humor, and your sorrow will not be silenced by the bullet at Ford's Theater. They are giving you the last word, a word that will echo through centuries, long after the mourners have gone home and the black drapes have been taken down.
The echo of your words does not fade, it amplifies, traveling through time on the pages of textbooks, in the recitations of schoolchildren, and in the quiet moments of reflection for those who seek wisdom in your letters. Your handwriting, once a practical tool for communication, has become an artifact, studied for its slopes and pressures, as if the very formation of the letters could reveal the secrets of the man. The collected works of Abraham Lincoln are a landscape of the American mind, a map of how a nation argued with itself through the pen of its most eloquent defender. In the decades and centuries that follow, your words are invoked in causes you could never have imagined, in the struggles for civil rights, in debates over economic justice, in the eternal American conversation about what it means to be free. The mainstream historical fact of your posthumous influence is its global reach. Your words, particularly the Gettysburg Address and the Second Inaugural, are translated into hundreds of languages and become touchstones for democracies and liberation movements around the world. From the halls of Parliament to the streets of Prague, your definition of government of the people, by the people, for the people, becomes a universal anthem for self-determination. Yet for all the solemnity, the quirky, human Lincoln never entirely disappears. The stories of your humor become part of the legend, a reminder that profound wisdom does not have to be solemn. The tale of the turkey pardon evolves into a White House tradition. Your invention for buoying boats, your patent model, is displayed in a museum, a curious footnote to a presidential resume. And then there are the mysteries that remain, the fragments that scholars still pick over. There is the so-called lost speech you gave in Bloomington, Illinois in 1856, a speech said to be so powerful it mesmerized the audience and caused reporters to forget to take notes, leaving no definitive record of what you actually said. It exists only in the memories of those who were there, a ghost speech that grows more legendary with each retelling. There's the ongoing analysis of your dreams and premonitions, the musings on fate and mortality that pepper your letters and conversations, suggesting a man deeply aware of the shadows that walked beside him.
Historians still argue whether the essential Lincoln, the man behind the myths and the memorials, can ever be truly known. The open scholarly debate revolves around the core of your motivation. Were you ultimately a pragmatist who used moral language to achieve practical ends, or a moralist who used pragmatic means to achieve a righteous goal? Was the real Lincoln the one who wrote, "I am naturally anti-slavery" in a letter to Joshua Speed, or the one who also wrote that his paramount object was to save the Union and is not either to save or to destroy slavery? This tension between the ideal and the possible, between the man of principle and the politician of compromise, is what keeps your legacy alive and debated. It is what makes your letters not just historical documents, but living conversations that continue to challenge and inspire. And so, as we near the end of this long journey through your words, the focus softens from the grand stages of history to the intimate, quiet act of reading itself. You are holding a book of Lincoln's letters, or perhaps you are listening to them being read, and the centuries collapse. The ink on the page, the sound of the voice, these are the bridges across time. The worries about troop movements and political campaigns fade into a distant hum, and what remains is the steady, calm, and deeply human voice of a man who thought deeply, felt profoundly, and wrote with a clarity that time cannot dim. The battles are over, the speeches are done, and all that is left is the wisdom, offered without expectation, a gift from the past to the present. The man who walked out of the wilderness and into the White House, who guided a nation through its darkest night, has left his words as a lamp for the path, a companion for the quiet hours, a reminder that even in the midst of great turmoil, a single thoughtful voice can speak across the ages.
And so we close the heavy, leather-bound volume of history. The last of Abraham Lincoln's letters has been read. The final whisper of his pen has faded into the silence of the night. The burdens he carried, the grief of a nation, the weight of a war, the hope for a better future, can now be gently set aside. There is no more need to analyze, to decipher, to mourn. The story is complete, the record is preserved, and the man himself has found his rest.
Let the calm certainty of the past soothe your modern worries. Let the measured rhythm of his words slow your breathing and ease your mind into a state of deep, peaceful stillness. The battles are long over. The speeches are echoes, and all that remains is a profound and comforting quiet. A blanket of history wrapped around you, safe and warm. Release the day, release the thoughts, and drift into a soft, dreamless sleep, cradled by the knowledge that some stories, once told, bring a peace that lasts until morning.